perhaps this answer might help the guys out there. So, I love the theme of like just taking action, right? And then going back to George, what you were saying too is like if you're asking all these questions, it's just she's basically looking at you like a man child, and it's just something else she has to manage, right? What she really wants is a man to lead her, right? I use this comparison quite a bit. Do you guys watch Yellowstone?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So I think one of the most attractive male figures for a woman in that show is Rip. And that's because Rip he's very steady, unless you piss him off. But like he's very steady with Beth, you know, and what I mean by that is he's dangerous, but he's also loving. He leads her, but he can also follow when needed. And when she's going through like her emotional craziness, he doesn't match that. In fact, he doesn't even really jump in the pool with her. He just stands. He just loves her steadily, right? But he doesn't.
The best clip is when he goes, "I don't have the energy for you today," and just walks away.
He's like, Beth, I'm not jumping in the crazy pool today, but I'll talk to you, right? Stuff like that. But for my wife, she'll tell you right away, I am not a bath person. Please don't run me a bath, right? So I think it's individualistic for women, but I think it's exactly what you're talking about, Brandon, which is always being observant of, you know, if I'm getting a glass of water, I'll get my wife a glass of water. I won't be like, do you want a glass of water? If she doesn't want it, then she'll just let it sit there. That's fine. Like I want her to know I did my part here. And I'm by the way, here's the other thing too. When you do these things, you do them without agenda.
Yep.
Without agenda.
Absolutely.
You do it because you love her, right?
Absolutely.
Not because you want something. Because women will sniff that a mile away, and that's repulsive, right? Because they're like, oh, you're doing the dishes because you want some action, right? Or you're, you know, and that's not leading, I don't think, your woman well. Mm-hmm. But I think what you can do is, so really understand what moves the needle in your wife's life, right? Because the thing is number one, just know she probably won't ask for help. And if she does get to that point where she's asking you for help, you probably aren't helping enough. And if she's having to ask you for help, she feels guilty about asking you for help because she probably feels the pressure that she should be doing it all, but that's also wearing her out. So it's really being like, we call it being an observant ninja, right? How can we be observant? How can we be even cognitive of my wife's mental load, right? So like, I'll give you another example of this, and we just learned this from a genius podcast guest who talks about what he calls cognitive mental load and invisible labor. His name is Zach Watson. You guys should really interview him. He's great. But he talks about like, and I didn't even realize, guys, how often I did this, and maybe y'all want to check yourselves real quick, see how often you do this, because it wasn't even on my radar. Anytime, like, if I need the mustard, or where are the pretzels, or where is that, like, I don't even look for it. Hey, Jess, do you know what this is? Hey, Mom, do you know what this is? Hey, Mom, have you seen this? Hey, Mom. Like, it's almost like Jessica is the manager of everything in this house.
Yeah.
So
that's
like,
the shopping cart principle right there.
Yeah, it's a shopping cart.
Yeah.
But I'm like, okay, like, look, I'm going to go look for this thing because, number one, I'm a fully functional adult, and I teach my kids the same thing now, too, because, like, perfect example of this is my 11-year-old was on antibiotics. He had an ear infection. And he's like, hey, I was putting him in bed. He's like, hey, I didn't get my antibiotics today. I was like, oh, well, let's go get it. We go in the fridge where it always is. It's not there. And he's like, let's just ask Mom. I was like, we are not asking Mom where it is. I was like, we will tear this kitchen and this fridge apart, and we're going to go to the other fridge too before we ask. So we tore the whole thing apart, and the whole time he's like, let's just ask Mom. I'm like, no. Leave no stone unturned until we completely we don't know where it's at. We look for this thing for like 10 minutes. Refrigerators all over the kitchen. And this is how I went to my wife. I didn't say, hey, do you know where Lawson's antibiotic is? You have to actually ask like this. Hey, I hate to ask, but I've looked everywhere. I've looked in the fridge. I've looked on the top shelf, the middle shelf, everywhere. I went in the mudroom fridge. I looked in there. I thought maybe it might be in the cabinet because it might be accidentally put in there. We've looked everywhere, and we don't know where it's at. Do you by any chance know where the antibiotic is? And she's like, oh, yeah, his last dose was this morning. I threw it away. I was like, okay. She's like, but I really appreciate you guys looking. So I think even that aspect of like your wife is not your point person or the family's point person for all information needed at all times. Like, go and do these things like effectively as you possibly can, or go be independent and take that load off of her. Because I will tell you, man, that cognitive mental load, that invisible labor like that, it is exhausting to them.
Yeah, and I think that separates leadership in a lot of work environments as well, because you have the guy that's constantly doubting himself and asking questions and overloading his superior when all he can do is just go and be his own independent person and just make executive decisions. Like, that's the guy that's going to grow over the person constantly, having to reassure and check. So I agree with that 100%.
Yeah, it's called decision fatigue. There's also compassion fatigue. I mean, there's all these kind of versions of kind of mental and emotional fatigues. And so, yeah, like, there's a great quote actually from one of my friends and mentors, John Michael Clark. He said, "Stop asking your wife to teach you how to be a husband." And so all these little things where it's like, mommy this, mommy that, mommy, 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 you're basically communicating to her, I don't know how to be your husband. I don't know how to lead you. And then, guys do that for like a decade or 15 years or 20 years, and then they can't understand why they have a sexless marriage. And it's like, dude, you haven't, given her the bare minimum basics that she craves as a woman for a decade or longer. There ain't no way, she's welling up within to be like, ooh, I want my husband, right? It's not how fit you are necessarily. It's not how much money you make. It's some of these very basic things that I think we've lost as a society. We stopped teaching young boys how to do this, and so then they get married and they have no idea what to do now. And, ironically too, I talk about this stuff a lot. The only detractors I've really gotten are other men. Most women are like, yes, more of that, please, like in the comments and everything. And I was expecting to get a lot of hate from like feminists and stuff. And even, like every now and then there's like one, but for every one feminist, there's like 100 women that will comment and like, yeah, that's exactly right. So, most women, even if they're kind of a boss babe, if they're married to you, they want you to be the husband. That's why they married you. And in the same way, I flip it back on the guys of, if you talk to her like a bro or you talk to her like a man and try and logic her to death, guess what you're going to get in return? A masculine wife. That's not what you want. You married a woman. You were attracted to her because she was feminine and all the things feminine, right? So stop conditioning her to become more like you. Make her more of a woman and you become more of a man, and then watch your relationship just transform. And to your point earlier, Larry, that is the best possible way to train your children for success in their own future relationships. Model being a good husband. Your wife models being a good wife. Whether you have sons or daughters, that is absolutely the way to do it. So on the flip side of what you talked about, Larry, with your boys, I'm a girl dad. So I'm modeling for her the type of man she should expect, the type of standards she should hold. And then my wife, we'll have some of the more intimate conversations about the feminine side of things, of course. But we both have that responsibility to do both jobs really well. And yeah, that, if you're a parent, congratulations. You signed yourself up for that voluntarily by having kids. So you got to live it now.